Alright guys, welcome back to the table. It's been a minute since I spoke with you. All is well, not to fear, nothing to concern yourself with. Got a nice little shot of the living room in the background there for you. But more importantly, the game table proper and yours truly. What I have for you is a breakdown of a set of rules I guarantee none of you are going to be familiar with. And then we're going to head over to the table here and see a half a turn of these rules in action to see how they work. So let's just get right to it. What I have here is what I'm tentatively calling Defiler En Parade. And for those of you that have seen any of my videos in the past, you'll know, or maybe you won't, this is an ongoing project. It is my perpetual attempt to hone I can't say perfect Napoleonic rule set, but something that is perfectly fits within my wheelhouse, and I'm getting ever closer. So why would I do that? There are any number of rule sets out there. Why go through the effort of maybe tweaking something or coming up with your own from scratch? These are all valid questions, and I would answer that by saying there's nothing wrong with any particular rule set out there. A number of them are fine. A number of them are fantastic. Okay, maybe there's a few that leave a lot to be desired. But overall, there's enough rule sets out there for everybody to find something that they can live with. I am no different. I have found a number of things that I like. Arguably, perhaps not. Black powder, primarily because there are a couple of mechanics in there that I'm very fond of. Very gamey, but that makes it fun. Another would be the Bevel's Napoleon thing that I've gone on and on and on and on about, which is primarily a board game, but it plays just like a miniatures game. In fact, it comes with miniatures. So there's that, and there's other things. There are things that are not Napoleonic in nature that have influenced this rule set and myself. So there's that as well. And you can play each of these, but to play each one separately and get the enjoyment out of each one, it's extremely time consuming and taxing. Why not just throw the things that I like together, change things that I don't like, etc. Now, that said, don't be surprised if I contradict myself from here on out. In fact, I guarantee I will contradict myself. Contradiction gets a bad rap, but contradiction for me represents truth and honesty, realness. If you're ever watching or listening to somebody and you never hear a contradiction, maybe become suspect of what they're saying, I'll leave it at that. Again, that's arguable. So another reason, to go back to what I was saying earlier, why would you do this? Okay. I've gone on record saying I like black powder. There's a small problem with that. Black powder, if you get just the core rule book, you get a couple of 2 or 3 perhaps scenarios in there for this. That's fine. What then? Well, you've got probably a point system that you could kind of do, but there's that, a limited number of scenarios. But wait, you say, there is these supplementary black powder Napoleonic books that you can get, and you're correct. There are at least 3 of those that I can think of off the top of my head. One that deals with the Russian campaign, one that deals with the Waterloo campaign, and one that deals with the early war peninsular stuff. So there's that. Fine, more scenarios. You got me there. But again, you're forced to pay out extra money for each one of those separate things, and I don't know, you're still limited. It's not a knock on what black powder has done. It's great stuff. However, and this is where I'm going to get laughed out of the room, we have, and you can't see it, but I'm counting just from my left here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games and or expansions of, you sitting down, Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Now, this is an extremely gamey system. It's not going to fall in everybody's wheelhouse when it comes to playing Napoleonics. I understand, trust me, I get it. However, there is one reason we should be paying attention to these games, and or not. If depends on what angle you're coming at your Napoleonic fix from. If you're doing the hardcore historical simulation style game, this may not be for you. That's fine. For those of you that are interested in more of a readily available source of accessible scenarios laid out for you, this is what you might want to look at and or pay attention to. And also, I would add, there are any number of these scenarios online for free to look at. You don't have to purchase anything necessarily. Why is that important? That's important because this creates the foundation for this rule set, which you don't have. That's not important. Just hear me out. Whenever I get these things polished up, I'll post them online for free for anybody to use. I'm not trying to get rich or make money off of this. I wouldn't. I don't have to worry about that anyway. But a number of scenarios, and that's what I have set up out here. This is Vomero, pardon the pronunciation, 21st of August, 1808. This is from the Commands and Colors Epic Napoleonic. So it is a bigger layout, a bigger scenario than you would typically have with the normal orthodox Commands and Colors stuff. But the important thing to bear in mind is you have a quickly ready-made, accessible scenario to put troops out and go at it. A couple caveats to that. Again, me being who I am, I've neglected to put any rivers or towns on the map. That's not important. What is important is everything else conforms to the scenario setup-wise, and it's worked out nicely. So we'll run through the rules here, an overview, and then we'll head over there. So what I have is an assumed scale of about 15 millimeter. This is easily changed. You have to just double the measurements, I suppose. If you want to do 28 millimeter, or you could just change it to your taste. Break down battalions and brigades, what they are, what they consist of. So I guess you could say this is geared towards somebody who perhaps is, I want to say new to the thing, but perhaps still trying to get Napoleonic wargaming under their belt, perhaps. Then I describe battalion strength, which typically consists of, and here's where we deviate immediately from everything else, 4 strength points. Now, how do you want to represent that? That's up to you. You can represent that with 4 gigantic bases of troops. You can represent that with 4 strength markers, what have you. But the bottom line is, the typical battalion strength of infantry is going to usually be 4 strength points. Rifles unit is going to be 1 strength point. A squadron of cavalry typically consists of 3 strength points, and a battery of artillery also consists of typically 3 strength points. So then you have your brigade strength, right, which is what how many battalions you have clumped together. And I may end up chucking this based on what I'm doing command-wise, but this could be useful for a point system later. Formations, we're looking at your basics: column, line, square, and open. What is open? Open formation is kind of a loose, unformed formation, if you will. Utilized primarily for perhaps woods, i.e. forest, rough ground, buildings, built-up areas, etc. Then you have your ranks. This is of utmost importance in this rule set because these break down into die roll modifiers in combat. Then your command and commanders, another extremely important and one of the chief idiosyncrasies or personalities of what I've come up with here. And we'll get to that on the table, which will help explain it better than what I have written down here. But suffice to say, it's kind of a, for lack of a better term, chain of command type deal, and you start with your commander-in-chief and work your way down. We'll get to all that. Your commanders and movement, it defines how far commanders can move. I allow for the wounding of commanders. Your morale, is very basic up front. So for your basic infantry, the morale is 7. For raw recruits, etc., unseasoned infantry, if you will, your morale is 6. For cavalry, artillery, and elite infantry units, your morale is going to be 8. Zones of control. Here's an interesting thing to consider. You don't typically hear or concern yourself with zones of control because you don't typically use what I have here, which is, well, hexes. This is not necessary or crucial to the function of the game. It is can be considered something supplementary or bonus if you do want to go that route. And even if you don't have hexes, you could still use measurements and just simply use, well, I have 4-inch hexes, so in lieu of a hex, you would just say 4 inches and use common sense. Zones of control affect, let's see, movement, the ability to rally, and when you're tracing command. So you need to bear that in mind. Stacking, there is no interpenetration or movement through enemy or friendly units. Again, keeping it simple, and that's something I kept trying to, a mantra or motif that I'm trying to preserve within these rules is to keep it simple. There are tons of things I would love to add, but then you end up with this, and I've seen rule sets do this, you end up with this thing, and you can tell it's just thing after thing after thing has been tacked on after the fact, and it just makes for a sucky rule set. Sequence of play. So here's another important aspect of this game. We have your initiative phase, then the rally/command phase, your fire phase, your movement phase, defensive fire phase, your melee/cavalry charge phase, and then your cleanup, house cleaning phase, which is just typically consists of removing various markers that no longer have any bearing on the turn, because the turn is in all effect over. When it comes to initiative, I've farted around with various ways to do this, fun ways to do it. I've messed with cards from a 52 deck of cards. I've messed with chit pull, which I'm a very big fan of, and I will add, there is no chit pull in here, which is something, if you would have told me, I would have settled on. I wouldn't have believed you. Again, I'm a big fan of chit pull, but that's not in here. I wanted to keep it a little more simple, and that can get a bit fiddly, maybe a bit tiresome, so I left it out. Instead I have, and you could argue this may be just as fiddly, but instead I have, for each commander that you have on the table, you're going to roll a d6, and each side's going to do that. You're looking for 5s or 6s. Those are bad. Whoever has the less number of 5s or 6s goes first. Sounds convoluted, sounds overdone, but it's not. It's actually rather simple. The rally and command phase is basically what it says it is. You're going to attempt to rally troops that have routed. I guess you could call this broken. But these are units that are no longer battle effective on the table. You need to rally them to get them back in the action. This is when you do that. Then once you do that, you're going to roll your command. Again, that starts with your commander-in-chief and trickles down. We'll get to that. And that determines which units will be available to do stuff. What's the stuff that they can do? Okay, well that depends. You can fire if you're within range and able, but bear in mind, if you fire, you cannot move. So if you elect not to fire, then that allows you to move. And that's broken down, of course, by unit type. Infantry, cavalry, artillery, etc. all have varying levels of movement. Now here's another thing that I had considered but have deviated away from now. I have said that perhaps one of the favorite things I like from Black Powder is the variable movement rate, which ties into command. For those of you unfamiliar with it, when you're rolling in the movement phase, you're basically doing a command check, and based on what you get will determine how far a unit can move. It's fun, it's entertaining, but a couple of reasons I left it out. A, I would be straight ripping that off of Black Powder, and if you're going to do that, you might as well just play back Black Powder. B, again, it seems a little gamey. and a little less realistic for me. It doesn't mean that it is for me. So when it comes to what I'm trying to do here, maybe that's a little too off to the gamey side for me for what I'm trying to do here. So I left that out. Defensive fire phase. This is something that your opponent, or I suppose you could say the non-phasing player of the turn, can conduct if a moving unit moves within range of a unit eligible to fire. Then finally, your melee/cavalry charge. Any infantry units that are adjacent can conduct melee. This is a simultaneously conducted thing. Both sides participate. And then any cavalry charges that the phasing player elects to attempt, he can do so at this time. Breakdown formation changes. Formation changes are important, if nothing else, for movement and your ranks when it comes to firing and or being attacked in melee. Let's see, breakdown wheeling, which is basically turning within a hex, recalling your cavalry, woods and buildings, and then we get to a more detailed explanation of combat, which we'll break down briefly for you now. Here's the other idiosyncratic or flavor crystal of this rule set for me, and this is something that makes these rules different from other things. Also, I would argue the command phase. Combat is conducted by establishing a to-hit number. This to-hit number is created by formulating any number of die roll modifiers, for lack of a better term, together in order to come with a total base number, which again I call it to-hit number. That number, once set, you'll roll 2 dice 6, and you need to roll equal or less than that number. If you'll notice, 2 dice 6 here, but they are of different color. That is important. That is intentional. That is a conscious effort on my part to do something cool. And for those of you that are familiar with it, ASL is showing itself through this a bit, with the different colored dice at least, and a little bit of the command phase. So why are these 2 dice different colors? Because, as I said before, once you establish your to-hit number, if you roll equal or less, you got to hit. Well, what determines the effect of the combat result or the damage you have inflicted? That is determined by this red die, and this red die, of course, has 6 sides, which corresponds to 6 possible results. Now, I've battled within my head on the severity of the roll, the severity of the attack inflicted, meshing with the combat result, etc. But at the end, I just left it random. So whether you're, this awesome old guard, attacking an assault, conscripts or whatever, unseasoned troops, and they're just beating the hell out of them and you roll great, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to inflict major damage. And I kind of like this because it relieves the game of a predictability factor that is not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily counterbalance that with a gaminess. In my opinion, it makes it a bit more realistic. I won't go into that now, but trust me on this. So the 6 potential casualty effects you can have consist of, and I should have this in the rules proper, but I don't. So I'll have to go to the combat results table. Now, I call it a combat results table, but it's 6 possible results, and those are easily remembered. So after a couple of run-throughs, you're not going to need to resort back to the combat results over and over and over to determine what has happened. So here we go. We have, this red die is a 6, and you're not re-rolling anything. This is one roll in combat to see if you get your to-hit number or less. You leave it alone, and then you just look at what the red die is. So we have an economy of dice rolling. We're not conducting all kinds of rolls to determine what happens. 2 dice, it's not 15,000 dice going into the bucket. economy of rolls and economy of dice. So we have a 6, which could be a +1 morale check, a 5, which could be a +2 morale check, a 4, which is a panic result, a 3, which is remove a strength point, 2, which is a retreat, and a 1, which is remove a strength point, panic, and retreat. Also, if there's an attached commander, he is now wounded. So 1 is loaded. What is panic? Panic is, you could call it wavering, you could call it disorder, any number of things. I call it panic because that's what I call it. To back up, we've got woods and buildings. They function as kind of like rough terrain, and these will consist of a die roll modifier when you're concocting your 2-hit number. What else? Cavalry charges are in here, and these are pretty brutal. They, basically, if you're charging infantry and they form square, or you're charging an opposition's cavalry unit frontally, aside from that, cavalry charge is successful, and you basically just roll a red die. So cavalry charges are effective and can be fairly brutal. Squares, got those in here as one would expect. Retreats, morale test, and then what panicked units can and cannot do. For instance, a panicked unit loses its rank bonus for firing, so they don't get that die roll modifier. Loses its own rank bonus in a melee attack and is considered to have 0 ranks if attacked in melee, so that's bad. Cannot support other units, and I've taken that out so we don't worry about support anyway. Cannot charge. Infantry and cavalry cannot react to a cavalry charge if they are panicked. You also suffer a plus... I've got +2 here, but that might change to +1. Die roll modifier to any morale test. And cannot change formation, but you can wheel. And the unit can recover from panic instead of conducting a formation change if it does nothing else that phase. Yeah, routing in here. If you'll notice, there's no routing result as such. Routing comes up as a result of a panicked unit panicking again. Essentially, that unit is now, I guess you could call it broken. But we'll call it routing, and what happens when you have to route is you have a 2-hex distance that you route, and then once you try to rally, if you fail to rally, you route another 1 hex, and you can potentially route off the table. So interesting stuff there, and I think that does it. There's a few special rules or optional rules that I'm working on, dealing with artillery, cavalry. I'm going to try and develop a point system for pickup games. And that's essentially it. If we head to the table, we can look more in depth at what's going on. And that's where we'll head now. I'll turn this camera and try and get a better view. Better overview without knocking the camera over. We'll do an alternate picture. Let's see what else we got here. Would that be better? That might be better, huh? We'll go back again, and yeah, I think that's going to be better for our purposes. I'm not even sure I need the little cam, but we'll just leave it for flavor. I'll flip the mic around and not blow the speakers out, and just get to it. So, I've already run through, as I said, or I did not say, I can't remember. I've already run through turn 1, so we need to run through turn 2, and I've called this 7 turns. Now, on a turn, you have your initiative roll, right? And that will determine who is the phasing player. And then after the phasing player finishes, the non-phasing player then becomes the phasing player. When they finish, that is the end of the turn. So, let's conduct our, and here's again where I contradict myself. I've said that you roll a die 6 for each commander. Now for the French, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll roll 7 dice. Now this is subject to change because I'm trying to weed out excessive dice rolls and dice. But for now, this is how we're going to do it. Any 5s or 6s we get, they have 1 5. So again, the least number of 5s or 6s rolled decides who goes first. For the British, I believe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 6. 2, 4, 6. Let's see if they roll any 5s or 6s. They have rolled a 5 and a 6. So the French go first. And we're done. I mean, again, it seems fiddly, and it's also subject to modification or change. But it's not a big deal. Especially when you consider the card method I was looking at and all this other junk. It got so convoluted it got silly. So now we need to conduct our command rules. Now how do we do this? We find what each side has, better known as Commander-in-Chief. And we're going to take the number that is assigned to that Commander-in-Chief. Now here's something that is not stated on the scenario. It's not going to be stated on here because we're adding it. What I've added is the stats for our commanders. Now these stats can consist of, and here is another nod to the ASL system, Advanced Squad Leader, which has nothing to do with Napoleonics, but it's such a great system I can't help but be inspired by a number of things. Your commanders can have anywhere from a 10 minus 3 rating to a 6 plus 1 rating, and 10 minus 3 is fantastic, with 6 plus 1 being awful. And bear in mind also that the theme here is low rolled. Low rolls are good. Again, another nod to Advanced Squad Leader. So we'll roll for our Commander-in-Chief, who is a 10 -2. Now that -2 does factor into certain things, but not for himself typically. So this -2 will not be a die roll modifier for his command roll. We simply need to roll 10 or less. We did, so he is good to go. What does that mean? That means in particular that our command range, which is for both sides 3 hexes, or if you don't have hexes, that would be 12 inches, roughly. You're going to look at your next lowest chain of command commander that is within that 3 hex range. So for me, that consists of this 8 rated leader. He is now in command because he is less than our Commander-in-Chief, and he's within command range, so we don't have to roll for him. Then we go down from there. We don't have anybody within range, so that is it for these two. They're in command. Then we need to go over here. We have a 9 -1 and an 8 -1. Well, we'll start with the 9 because you start from highest to lowest. He is in command. That means this 8 leader is also in command because he was within range of this commander who rolled his command. Now we'll head over here. We have this guy kind of by himself, so we need to roll for him 9 or less, and he is in command, and that brings us to 2 more commanders who are too far apart to affect each other. So their ratings are 7. So we'll roll for the first one, and he is in command. And the next one is also in command. We've made all our commands. That can happen, it cannot happen. Last turn, I had 3 of these guys out of command. Now, if we had, say for instance, one of these leaders miss his command roll, that means that any units that are under his command, effectively within that 3 hex range that only he could potentially affect command over, they would need to individually roll to see if they were in command. So let's say this 8 leader failed his command. This guy's too far to affect anybody over here because they're outside of that 3 hex range. So we would roll individually for each one. The infantry, for instance, would be 7 or less. Artillery would be 8 or less. And the cavalry would be 8 or less. Now, again, the whole benefit of rolling your command for your commanders is there's a potential more likelihood that if you have to roll individually for each battalion, you're not going to get your rolls. If you get one right off the bat for your commander, everybody's automatically in command that is within range, guaranteed. So there's our command phase for the French. We're going first, and then we, or perhaps I should have done this first, we have one routing unit here. So because we have the leader with him, we can use the leader's rating, which is obviously higher than the cavalry unit's rating, which is an 8. So the leader's a 9. We'll want his rating. And there is a modifier for routing units, and that is, in fact, +2. Now, anything die roll modifier-wise with a plus is bad. Anything that we would subtract is good. So when we roll these dice, we want 9 or less, but we have to add +2. However, our leader is not just a 9 leader, he's a 9 -2 leader. So we will subtract the +2 from the -2 the leader has to get 0. That means we just need to roll 9 or less, and we did. We rolled a 7. This routing unit now becomes a panicked unit. Sounds bad still, but it's much better than routing. And what we'll do is they can now, after you rally, can they see if they can turn to face 180 or how that works. Let's see. What do I have? I have so they stay like they are, but they're just panicked now. That is the command rally phase. Next phase is our fire phase. This is for the French only. Non-phasing player sitting there checking his phone, I guess. So anybody within range, and here's where we talk about ranges. This artillery unit has an infantry unit in range. We have, I'm going to mark these guys now and then I can run through. I'm even using markers from Advanced Squad Leader. So they will be able to fire. These guys will be able to fire. If you're panicked, you can still fire, but you get a penalty for doing so. These guys need to move, so I'll leave them alone. These guys have a unit within range, and not a whole lot of units within range, firing range of the French here. Just 1, 2. These guys can't fire because they can't see them because they're too far back on this hill. That's pretty much it. Everybody else needs to get moving here. So let's run through that. We'll see the combat mechanism in action. Now for the firing phase, we go to our chart. We've got our foot artillery here. Foot artillery has a fire strength of, and we're running down our die roll modifiers here to determine our to hit number. First is your fire value. The foot artillery unit here has at this range a fire value of +3, so that's 3. Their unit strength is 3, so that's 6. These guys are in column, so that's 8. But they're on a hill, higher ground, that drops back down to 7. So we need a 7 or less. Now here's another cool thing about a 2-dice-6 system. There's a bell curve, and you will typically roll 7s more often than anything else. So you can, it makes it easier to do game design, etc. with a 2-dice-6 system because you know you're always going to roll a 7 on average. That said, we need a 7 or less. Is that what I said? Well, we got the hit, and what do we roll? You check your red die here. The red die is a 1. We did get the hit. We got a 3. That's less than 7. The red die is a 1. We look at 1, and that is your blowout hit. That is a remove a strength point. They are now panicked, and they have to retreat. And if there was an attached commander, he would be wounded. So that's a hell of a thing. We'll find a strength marker here. Alright, so we'll put him here. Oh yeah. Well, and you'll get to see this again because we've got a couple more firing rounds here. For those of you that didn't quite get what happened there. So, what happened? He fired and was marked accordingly. Why am I marking those that fire? Because those that fire can't move, remember? They can't move. If you're firing, you're not moving. If you're moving, you're not firing. None of this fire at half power if you move, blah, 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 blah. No. If you're firing, you ain't moving. If you're moving, you ain't firing. Simple as that. What do we have? This unit here. This is a panicked unit. So they're not going to get their rank bonus for firing at these guys. Their fire strength is a 4. No, I'm sorry. This infantry line, their fire strength is a 1. Their unit strength is a 4. That makes 5. And the it would be a 7 for firing at these. Now they're open, so they don't get a rank anyway. This is a rifles unit, and they're in open order. And an open order unit has no ranks. So we're at 5 still, and they're on higher ground, so that drops to 4. So let's run through this again. The fire value of this unit is a 1. It's a strength of 4, makes 5. No rank bonus because it's a rifled unit in open order. They're on higher ground, so it drops to 4, and they're panicked. But that is a moot point because they don't have any ranks anyway, so they wouldn't get that rank bonus if they did, but they don't have them. So we're down to what, 4 or less? Roll a 10, they missed. Marked as fired. That brings us to these two guys over here, finally. And this unit here, again, just a regular infantry unit. The regular infantry unit in line has a +1, so that's 1. Their unit strength is 3, however, because they took a hit. So now it's 4. They do get the rank bonus for firing at these guys who are in column. So that's 6. So 4, 5, 6. But they're on higher ground, so it drops down to a 5. And they got 7, so they missed. And then finally we have this light infantry unit here firing at another light infantry unit. I have these guys marked, not marked per se, but the number of stands helps for me define what they are. So 3 stands is a regular line unit, 2 stands is a light infantry unit, 1 stand is a rifles unit. That's the way I've got it. And then I have in my head the unit strength. Light and line are typically 4, so that's always in my head. Anybody that's not marked, I know is a strength of 4, unless they have a hit marker, and then I deduct. And then I know that, again, off the top of my head, from memory, that cavalry and artillery have a strength of 3, unless marked with a hit marker. So let's roll for these guys. Light infantry. We have a fire value of 2, which is 1 greater than a regular line unit. Same unit strength, so that's 6. Firing at another group in columns, so that's 8. They're on higher ground, so that's 9. There's our hit number, 9 or less. So we roll 2 dice. We got a 6. That is less than our hit number. Additionally, our red die is a 2. So these guys retreat. Another thing to consider that I haven't really touched on or mentioned is the way I have these placed within these 4" hexes. You can't really physically put them in line to represent line. They pretty much stay like this for purposes of this game. And I know if they're in column or line because if you move, you have to be in column to move. You can't move if you're in line. And when they're marked with a move counter, that means they're in column because they moved. So that's the end of the fire phase. Nothing too taxing there. That brings us to the movement phase. A lot of movement going on. Here's where we learn our different movement ranges. So your basic move range for infantry is a measly 1 hex. So we'll put him here. We'll move him up here. And we're again marking them as moved. And I have an ASL solitaire game with a bunch of move markers, so I'm using those. This heavy cavalry can move too. So what we're doing with these guys is swinging them around. Another obvious thing that I'm not doing is dividing the table up into 3 sectors and using the cards for commands and colors. Essentially all I'm really doing is utilizing the scenario from commands and colors, which there is no end of scenarios, and that's great. So, will these guys move? No, because why? They fired. These guys are panicked. Can a panic unit, what's going on with movement with them? Let's check. Looks like you can still move if you're panicked. So move them again 1 and mark them as moved. Let's actually put these behind so I can see better what's going on. So again, once these guys have moved, they're now considered in column. Being in column is bad when you're fired at because that gives the enemy a better rank bonus. But if you want to move, you've got to be in column. There's no movement with line. Being in line formation. And these guys move up on here. Let's bring him up and him up. And you know, I feel so this is light infantry. Do they still move 1? No, they can move 2. Light infantry and rifles can actually move 2. So let's go ahead and do that. 1, 2. Maybe we can make something happen against that artillery there. Moving. These guys fired. What does that mean? That means they can't move. They're paralyzed. This guy's moving up here. Moving on up. So artillery units moving up. 1 hex. As he moved, he is now considered limbered. Heavy cavalry moving 2. 1. Let's put him right here. So also with this method, especially with this command method, you don't have to concern yourself with what battalion belongs to what brigade, and etc. Why is that important? Because if you want to hijack other scenarios and things, the scenarios are not going to conform to what a battalion and a brigade should consist of. So there's another reason. That's another reason why I've done it this way. You can circumvent that necessity simply with the command system I've concocted here and the 3 hex range. You don't have to worry about somebody getting activated twice by a different commander because you're only going to ever be able to either move or fire, etc. So it all works out in the wash. They move, so they get a move counter. Commanders cannot fire or fight on their own, so there's no reason to mark them as moved when you move them. These guys are going to move away, run away. So let's turn one hex corner. That's one, and then two, and another hex corner. As they try to get out of there. So there's that. They moved. And we have all these guys down here. Let's bring this light infantry unit up on the hill. He's moved. And then let's bring heavy cavalry up too. 1, 2. Place them in place for a charge. I can't count. That's 3. Then we go 2. I wonder if they're still in place for a charge. We'll see. No, they're not, because they can only move 2. All right. Move this guy up. Move this guy up. And bring the artillery. You know, I could put them on this hill, or I could. Well, if we're going to move them up, and we have a choice of hill or no, then let's put them on the hill. We need to bring this guy up. Put him here and attach him to this unit here. Almost done with movement. Seems to be the most taxing part of the game. These guys fire, so they're not doing anything. This guy will come up and support, so to speak, of those two. I'll move him up. Move him up. Almost there. 1, 2, put him there. In the woods, our commander comfortably in the woods. I'm also even using the actual leader counters from ASL for these leaders. Isn't that something? Move him up. Alright, so that's the movement phase. Everybody that can and desired to move has done so. What does that leave? That leaves the defending fire phase. So anybody that has a moving enemy unit within range can try and do their stuff. So that would be, and we'll mark them as well. That will be these guys. This infantry unit has this moving unit in range. Obviously, this artillery unit is going to probably destroy this guy. We'll see. These rifles have unit in range. Can't see them. Everybody else is out of range for here. These guys didn't move, so that's really it. Let's run through this. We have, starting with this infantry unit here, they're going to conduct defensive fire at this unit that moved up, who are panicked. If they panic again, what's going to happen? They're going to rout. And how far will they rout? 2 hexes away from the enemy. So, run through our modifiers again. This is a normal line infantry unit. They have a battalion that just committed suicide. Fire value of 1, unit strength of 4, that makes 5. Their rank bonus, they will get +2, so that brings it to 7. Why is that 2? Because they're in column. Why? Because they move, so that's 7. Terrain balances out because they're both on hills. That's it. Roll 7 or less and you get your stuff there. We did roll a 7, however, the red die is a 6. That means a +1 morale check. Now, no attached commander, so we have to resort to our basic unit morale for our infantry is what? A 7. But we're going to add 1 to the die roll, and we got a 3, +1 is 4. They did fine. Forgot they were panicked, so there should probably also be a modifier for that. But even with a +2, they still would have passed. So, moving along, we've got this artillery firing canister at this adjacent light infantry unit that is moving up, trying to take that artillery emplacement in melee. Probably a bad idea, but let's see what happens. 1 hex range there is a good lord, +5 already. Unit strength is 3, so now we're at 8. +2 from a unit moving in column, that's a 10. And they're on a hill, so now we're at 11. If we roll a 12, that's the only way they're not going to hit. And they got close, they rolled a 9. But these guys got lucky because they rolled a 6, which again means just a +1 morale check. Being that they're a 7, we'll add 1 to the die roll, and they failed it because they rolled an 8. And it was a 9, and they needed a 7 or less. They are now, you guessed it, panicked. Rightly so. And then finally, this rifle unit is going to conduct offensive fire at this French line unit that moved up. They are fire strength of a 3, believe it or not. Unit strength of 1, however, makes 4, and then 2 for being in column makes 6. So 6 or less, and rolled a 7, got nothing. And that's probably how it'll work out. In fact, I don't know that those guys would stay there and fire. They probably would have backed off because they don't want to get caught in melee. They'd get churned up. And that's it for defensive fire. That brings us to melee and cavalry charges. These guys, and this is for the French cavalry charges, they've got nothing in range because they're heavy and they only have a movement factor of 2. These guys have nothing in range. They're also heavy with only a movement factor of 2. Well, I mean, maybe they could. And what you want is the enemy unit adjacent to you at the end of that move. So, I mean, maybe I could circle around here and go, well, that seems like a waste, though, to me. And it doesn't matter that they already moved. For those of you that noted that, hey, your cavalry moved. Do they get the cavalry charge as well? Yes. These guys are panicked and all screwed up, so they're not doing anything. These guys could have a valid, awesome charge, but let's do it. They do have it. Well, so to charge, you just declare a charge. You move them where they need to be, and at the end of this move, they have place the enemy unit in front of them, adjacent to them. They get the roll to form square. Now, they were 2 hexes away. That determines the die roll modifier to form square. They have no attached commander which could affect that die roll. And they are a morale of 7. So because these guys were charging from 2 hexes away, that is a +2 morale check. So 7 or less, add 2 to the die roll, we got an 8. They did not form square. That is not good. I think they could form square with cavalry charging from 2 hexes away, but I guess they couldn't do it. Now, that said, the cavalry charge is automatically successful. Why? Because unless they're charging against, again, a square or another cavalry unit frontally, the charge is successful. So we simply roll a red die and see what we get. And we got a 1, which is the best result you can get. That is a strength point loss, so they take a hit. They're also panicked. And what else? They're also retreating 1 hex. Not 2. Why? Because they're not routing, they're retreating, and because of that, they maintain their front facing, and I can grab the ground that they vacated. In fact, I have to because it was a charge. You have to do that in melee or charge. You can't not advance into the freshly vacated ground. What are my options now? My options now are, I think I can do an additional cavalry charge, and why wouldn't I? Let me verify that. I can not conduct a charge, but may still fight in melee. Okay. sure it would be another charge though. I think it's just melee at this point. You know what, I'm not going to do it, and here's why. Because if I do it, these guys get a chance to melee back. Because it would be simultaneous as it is melee. If I don't do it, I guarantee I don't allow anything to happen to this unit, and maybe I can pull them away at some point. But that wouldn't work either, because this isn't a rules thing, it's a strategy thing. That wouldn't work either, because they don't get to move again after this turn. So they would be sitting ducks. Maybe I should. Okay, let's go through with it. Let's go ahead and melee with this. It's not a charge at this point anymore, it's a melee. So let's just do it that way. Again, with the French here, we've got melee value for, this is heavy cavalry. We've got +3, unit strength is 3, so that's a 6, and we're coming at a unit in column, so that's an 8. No terrain modifiers. But they still didn't form square. And if they're panicked, they're not going to form square. So they've got it either way. I'm going to roll 1 again, which is awesome. So we flip this 1-hit marker to a 2-hit marker. In fact, this panic, if they're panicked again, they're what? They're routing. So they have routed. I don't have to worry about them battling back anyway, because they routed. If they were able to stay there, they could possibly inflict damage on that cavalry unit. But that cavalry unit is now done. In fact, you could argue they're blown after that run. So they're done. And they're way deep in enemy territory, so they need to be recalled. They're going to get lost. Impetuous cavalry. You're going too far. What does that leave? Is that it? That was our cavalry charge? Any other just straight melee stuff? Yes, we have these two here. And that should be it for the French. And then I'll cut you guys loose. So, if you're panicked, you cannot attack in melee, right? That seems to be something I remember. Panic. I don't see anything about that. Alright, so let's go ahead and do it. I don't see anything about being panicked and unable to attack in melee, so let's check our melee. And then when it comes to your die roll modifiers for determining your to-hit number, a little bit different for fire versus melee. So with melee you have the rank bonuses that are a little bit different, because in melee you are comparing the firer's melee value to the screen just went black. You compare the firer's melee value ranks to the let me start this over. In melee you compare the attacking unit's rank bonus to the defending unit's rank bonus to determine if there's any kind of variation there that would function as a modifier. Doesn't happen in fire. You just simply determine the defender's rank bonus. Also, you have square and or non-square to consider as well. So, that said, we have this light infantry unit, strangely enough, attacking this artillery unit in melee. Their melee value is a 0, so again, this is probably a bad idea. But unit strength of 4, only, let's see, yeah. That's 6 because they're in column, remember, because they moved. But the defender artillery gets a -1 rank bonus for being artillery, so that's 5. They're attacking uphill, so that's 4. So let me be sure to run through this again. The melee value is 0. The unit strength is 4. Rank bonus, we're looking at 6. Drops back down again to 5. And then because the artillery's on the hill, it goes to a 4. So 4 or less, not very good odds, and we got an 8. What do you figure there? Artillery cannot conduct melee. They already had their fire shot. They can't retreat. So we'll just leave that how it is. The rifles, again, strangely enough, are going to conduct melee. Well, that is to say, the French are going to conduct melee against rifles who... this is a rule I may add later, that if an enemy unit becomes adjacent to a rifles unit, they will retreat. I think that's what would typically happen. Real world scenario, but they're sticking around. And for purposes of example of play, we'll leave it how it is. So, again, since they moved, they're in column. And that is fire, a melee value of 0, a unit strength of 4. They're in column, so that's a 6. This rifle unit is open, so that's a -2. So that's a 4. No terrain bonuses here for either one. So it's 4 or less, and we didn't get it. So the fact that these guys are not formed and spread all around made it kind of a useless attempt on the French part to even conduct that melee attack. You could argue that the rifles could battle back in melee, but again, I don't think they would. And I need to amend this so that it's reflected in the rules, but I think they would just be hightailing it. That is the end of the French turn for turn of the 7-turn game, the 6th turn. So the only final thing left to do would be to... now what I have is to remove these move markers. But I think it would be more pertinent to leave them because, again, to determine who is in column and who is in line, obviously if you moved, you're in column, so I should probably keep them. However, I will remove the fire markers and the defensive fire markers. And I think that does it. So again, there are a couple of things that need ironed out, but it works. The thing works, and it's crazy. Not only does it work, it's somewhat of a original take on Napoleonic warfare, at least in my opinion, compared to other rule sets, with the simplified, abstracted command system. Simply needing to be within 3 hexes and working chain of command from highest rank to lowest rank. And of course the combat mechanism, which is establishing through modifiers your to-hit number and then rolling equal or less to that number. And finally, if you do so, checking the result of that red die against your 6 possible combat results. The rest, you could argue, is fairly standard fare, but that's that. So perhaps that interests you guys. Perhaps it does not. If it doesn't, that's fine. It's not your thing. I can live with it. For those of you that are interested, feel free, of course. Goes without saying, though I'll say it. Post your comments underneath. And let me know what you think. Criticisms, questions, etc. And I'll do my best to answer them. The building up of Black Powder Epic Waterloo stuff continues. I have cavalry that still need to be based and flocked to beef up that. I may look into, or not, skirmishers potentially, if not used directly for skirmishing, maybe working them into the games in a different way. I'm not sure yet. It just seems like a lot of guys on sprues, skirmishers speaking, specifically for the French, to just leave on the sprue because I don't want to mess with skirmishers. So we'll see. And then, of course, I still have pre-ordered the Highlanders, which would, for purposes of this rule set, be considered elite infantry. So they would have a morale of 8. And also I would assign them a fire value of +2 and a melee value of +1. Which is good stuff. And then the French Guard on pre-order, also elite infantry, so they would have a morale value of 8 as well. So lots of stuff to do and look forward to. And of course, again, play testing and ironing out these things, and also running just a orthodox game of Black Powder and potentially General Desarmes, and seeing how this stuff works with that. Now, I think the last video that I posted did have these guys set up according to a General Desarmes scenario. I may come back to that. Obviously, it's changed, but I may revisit that. And of course, I haven't worked in the Laissant farmhouse, so there's that yet to do as well. All right, guys, I've droned on long enough. For those of you that have stuck with me the entire time, I appreciate it immensely. If you find yourself watching these videos and, well, gosh darn it, you're not a subscriber, what do you got to lose? Hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. I'm not going to tell anyone you did it. You don't have to tell anyone yourself. It'll be our secret. But it would be appreciated. And yeah, so all right, guys, I'll talk to you the next time, and be safe.